thank you very much for watching or listening. Liam Hartree here today with another episode of the Simply Inspired podcast. Today, joined by a very, very special guest. I'm very honored and blessed to welcome Sandy McCallum to the show today, a professional elite ultra runner who has achieved a lot. Just to read a few highlights, we're talking today about Sandy completing 19 desert ultra marathons, 4 desert marathons. We're talking 37 ultra marathons in total, 62 marathons, so 99 races of marathon distance or greater. But as always, we're going to be going a little bit deeper than just talking about sports. Today, we will also touch on some mindset, some motivation, some inspiration about how anything is possible with the belief and hard work. We'll be talking about Sandy's comeback from a tough time as well. We'll also be talking about cycling. I mustn't forget that as well. There's also a number of century rides in there, 100-mile bicycle races. So, wow, something you don't hear every day. Sandy, thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for taking time out of your afternoon and making this possible. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, likewise, I'm thrilled to have you here. Obviously, you've been very, very busy. You've been a very busy lady. I mean, I've interviewed a number of people who've competed in a number of ultra marathons. I think you've competed in the most of anyone I've met yet. So we'll talk about past, present, and future. I'd like to go back in time a little bit to talk about when you first started running, or when you first started in sports in general. Was that something that was always part of your life from a very young age, or was it something that came in at a later point in terms of competitive sports and your enjoyment of that side of things, please?
I'd always been involved in sports from a very young age. I was on swim team, track and field. I did baton, ballet, whitewater rafting, parachuting, hot air ballooning, fencing. I just was thrown into a lot of different things, and it was running that just always stayed with me. But then I started a career in television, and I just was, whatever I seemed to do, I do it 24 hours a day with 110%. So all of my focus was on my career. And then toward the end of my career, I looked at a marathon. I had some friends that were planning on doing the New York City Marathon. I had never done, besides track and field, a race in my life. And they said, why don't you come with us and do the New York Marathon? And so that started it all. That was back in 1994.
Wow, that was the start of the journey. Now, we'll go headlong into the running topics shortly, but when I was reading on your website, Sandy, as well as your achievements in running, you've also lived in a number of different parts of the world and had diverse experiences. I came across Europe, I came across Japan, obviously Canada and the USA. So again, we'll have a job on our hands to condense this down, but can you share with us a little bit about some of the places that you have lived in the world, if that would be all right, please?
I was brought up in Canada, but my father was a fighter pilot with the Canadian Armed Forces. So he was stationed over in Europe. We lived on 2 different tours in Germany. So that added up to about 8 years. And then I lived in Sardinia for 4 years. And then my television career took me over to Japan for a year. And I lived there working for NHK, the Japan Broadcasting Corporation broadcast. And then met a person living in Florida, the United States. I moved down here, and just eventually down the road, we ended up getting married. So now I'm living in the US in Colorado.
Wow, you're a regular globetrotter there, Sandy. You've been around quite a bit, which is something I think is just nice to mention for our listeners, just to set the scene a little bit as well. So you mentioned about that first marathon, and one of the things that interests me a great deal is mindset. In that first race, or maybe in your first couple of races, however it went, did you ever expect at that time to have that you were going to take things as far as you have now, basically, or were you taking it more a race at a time at that point?
That first marathon, it's funny because I tell people this, that um, I used to go out at night, have some drinks, and everyone was saying, there's no way you're going to be able to run a marathon. And I just got a book and followed the training plan. And I remember my first day heading out, I went half a mile out from my house and half a mile back, and I collapsed on the couch and I went, they're right. There's no way I'm going to run a marathon. But I just kept at the program, and I started having fun with the running. I looked forward to my runs, and I didn't know what to expect with the marathon. And New York is just such a great city, and they're just so welcoming of the runners in that race. I just had so much fun. It was so exciting, but I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I was going to be able to finish it. I didn't know what was going to happen. People warned me, oh, you could have a heart attack, you could crap your pants, anything can happen. And I was like, oh my God. And it went well. I wasn't awfully speedy, but I finished. I crossed the line. I started hyperventilating because I was sort of like a little teary that I'd done it. And then I was hooked after that.
Wow, absolutely amazing. And obviously, as you mentioned earlier, you go 110% with everything you do. So after that, was it full swing in terms of future marathons? Did you start doing them quite regularly? Because I know there's obviously how many 62 marathons. I've got notes here, by the way, of everything you've achieved because there's so much to actually talk about. But was it pretty much full swing after that for you, Sandy?
No, because I was still in television. And I think my next one was 2 years later. Um, I I did New York again in 98, I think it was. So I did 5 marathons. And after 5 marathons, I started looking at, okay, what else is there? And that's when I found an ultra marathon, and I'd never heard of it before. So after 5 marathons, I decided to move up in distance as opposed to focus on getting faster and faster. I was more interested in going longer and longer. And so that was the transition point. So there were only from 94 to 2000, I'd only done 5 marathons.
Wow. That is remarkable in itself because I actually think that's very inspirational for people because looking at everything you've achieved since then, I think a lot of people would look at this and think, okay, love at first sight, full swing from the beginning, you were into this 24/7, but it's quite inspiring to learn that you sort of built that up step by step. Let's go into it a little bit with the ultra marathons itself. Can you share with us which one was your first race in the ultra distance and how that went, just to get a feel for the progression from regular marathons to ultras, if that makes sense, please?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of smart athletes would say you have to build up to a distance, like, do a progress from a marathon to a 50K to a 50 mile, 100K, 100 mile. My first ultra marathon was the Marathon des Sables over in Morocco. It was a 150-mile stage race in the desert, and it's frequently listed in the top 10 races of the toughest ultra marathons in the world. And that was my first one. And this was before Facebook or groups or networking, but there was an article in the paper about a Canadian guy that had done the race. And I thought it was fascinating because I had always wanted to go to Africa. I was more interested in going to Africa than the race itself, but they just worked out together. And so he gave me a few tips on what to do. And I had never done an ultra. I had never traveled overseas by myself. I was always with someone if I went with my parents or with a partner. And I had never camped before. We were staying every night in tents. I'd never been in a sleeping bag. I didn't have any idea, about stage racing. And so I was just kind of winging it and went over there. And it's funny because I got off the plane and was heading down the steps onto the tarmac. And I remember I was in Morocco, in Ouarzazate, which is the gateway to the desert. I remember looking out and thinking, wow, I'm home. like, this is where I'm meant to be. And it was just a weird feeling in that it felt like I was home. I'd always wanted to go to Africa, and I got there and I thought, wow, I'm home.
Wow, that is incredible because obviously you do have this attraction to the desert, and it is somewhere that you obviously feel well, as you say, at home. And I think that's a remarkable. Um, is that why you have repeatedly sort of gone back to the desert type environments, you know, the very arid, hot places for a lot of races, particularly in the ultra marathon side of things? Is that then because you feel at home there?
It is, absolutely. I love the desert. Just love it. And a lot of the French people do this race, this Marathon des Sables, which I've now done 9 times. I went back every year for 9 years in a row. And I really related to the French because we all just sort of called ourselves desert lovers, you know. Just something about the desert attracted us all there year after year. So that ended up being my favorite one. But the one that I had the most difficulty with, it's the Sahara Desert that I love the most. I've been to the Gobi Desert, Atacama Desert, you know, Badwater in the States, and none of them have the same appeal as the Sahara.
That is incredible, absolutely remarkable. On the subject of the different races and things, as I said to you before, we'll have to condense these down somehow. So the way I've tried to do it, obviously talking about a few of your favorites, a few of the toughest terrains that you were on, and break it down a few different things. Starting with your favorites, I mean, you've sort of half answered that, Sandy, in the sense that obviously the Sahara and everything is something you're very passionate about. So, but given everything you've accomplished, I have to ask anyway, do those the Marathon des Sables or some of those stand out as your favorite races, or are there others? I know it's quite a big question given well, 99 races and the cycling and everything else, my goodness. But basically, which ones do stand out for you as being your personal favorites?
Absolutely, the Marathon des Sables. I did it 9 times. I'm planning on going back again. And the reason I love it is I love the camaraderie with the runners. I love the race itself. I love that desert. I love Morocco. I love the people in Morocco. And I love what it taught me. I think that because it was my first and I was naive, and, you know, I just came back every year and met new challenges. But what I really loved is that race in particular, I don't know why, taught me to enjoy the simple things in life, to appreciate the simple things. You know, when you have kids running along beside you, when you go through a village and, you know, they're in bare feet and, you know, wanting, you know, some water from you or a treat or whatever. And you go through villages where things are just so simple, and you see you know, a mule going by where they're going to a well and filling up the jugs of water. You just go, wow, you know, like I just took so many things for granted. And when I saw how happy some people were in simple settings, appreciating the simple things, I took that away, and I felt like that's what I learned there, which makes it a special place for me.
Absolutely. I understand what you mean very much. I mean, I'm not nearly as well traveled as you are, but I've had the same experience in places that are technically regarded as poor and deprived places, or third world, or whatever you want to call it. But you go there, and a lot of times the people are happier than a lot of people I know personally in, you know, here in the UK, in the US, and things. Obviously, I'm generalizing slightly, but broadly speaking, they're full of such joy, even though by all accounts they shouldn't be, you know. And it is a fascinating distinction there. So really glad that you mentioned that, actually, in all fairness, as sort of one of the intangible benefits of the races as well as the races themselves. Obviously, you competed on quite variable terrain and in different locations. The desert is certainly a passion, but are there certain races that stand out as having the toughest terrain? I'm curious about this because you jumped in the deep end, the first one, the desert, Marathon des Sables, wow. But you progressed to try a variety of ultra marathons. And are there certain ones that I'd imagine that they all have an element of toughness, however you regard that. But are there certain ones that stand out for you as being more so in that regard?
I love the desert races. I tend to really like long, flat, sandy surfaces, the sand dunes, the heat. I do well. So that's why I keep going back. I'm not a mountain goat. I don't do so well climbing and descending over rocks. I'm just not that person. So one of the races I signed up for was in the Atacama Desert, and it was at high altitude. Can't remember off the top of my head. Right now here in Colorado, I'm at about 8,000 feet, and that race was probably around that high. But it was just all rock. Running through salt flats in the mud, people would lose their shoes in the mud, you know, and you'd have to go digging to get your shoe back. But the scrambling over rock really just killed me. And so there were two girls that were always in front of me, and both of them had climbed Everest. And so I was always trying to catch them, and it was just so hard because they were so good. And that race ended, and I have never since then been that exhausted after an event, and it was cold, which I don't do well in. They ended up switching the starting date in the year of that race because things would freeze overnight, your water bottle, etc. And I would hide in my sleeping bag until about a minute before the race started, you know, and then just stuff everything in my pack and start running. But that race ended. I ended up second behind the two girls that ran as a team. So I was second place in that race. And typically they'll clean up and they'll, you know, go for a nice dinner because you finish early. I lay in my bed with a chair on my bed with my feet up on the chair, completely exhausted. They took everything I had. And so those races like that are difficult for me.
Absolutely. Well, I like the brutally honest appraisal of that, Sandy, because it shows people both sides. It shows people obviously the glamour of winning and having the success, but just how brutal and physically and mentally taxing and emotionally, I'd imagine, the races can be in certain instances. So that's really something. So obviously, as we move through these, you'll have to fill me in a little bit on the timeline of the cycling. I'm familiar with some of your achievements, but I'm not sure if you were running those side by side with ultra marathons. Am I correct in saying that you were basically doing marathons, ultra marathons, and these century 100-mile cycling events overlapping in time? Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, when I moved to Florida is when I first discovered Century Rides. I had never heard of it before. I had never cycled before. And because I was in Florida, there were a lot of marathons. The weather was always great. So, and I was doing the ultra marathons. So I was training for all three. I would probably do 2 or 3 marathons a month for training runs, working toward an ultra. And the riding I would do also was like good cross training, but I just was doing really long rides. I would get up at, 2 or 3 in the morning, be out on my loop that I did on my bike and just do loops during the week, long rides out on the highway. And it all just kind of worked together, that each one helped the other in terms of working different muscles, getting stronger, being disciplined.
That is really something. I mean, running regular marathons, such a feat in themselves, the cycling as preparation for the ultras. I thought it might work out that way, but it's quite remarkable to be honest with you. So can you share with us a little bit about not only the physical training, but the mental preparation for races? Because I'd imagine you have to have a very strong will to do what you do, as well as having a strong body. Was there any mental or emotional process that you would go through before a race as well?
I think every runner will tell you, every experienced runner will tell you that visualization is really important. every single day that I go out for a run with this race that's coming up, for example, I'm visualizing that race. I'm visualizing when I get ready in the morning that I'm getting ready for the race. I visualize getting to the start. I visualize going through this race that's coming up is going to be, 105-degree during the day with, 95% humidity. And so I visualize how much that's going to suck. Like, it's going to be hot. It's going to be brutal. And there's times when it'll cross your mind, right? We're like, oh, am I going to be able to do this? And you just can't go there. It'll come up, but for me, you just can't go there. You can't settle into that spot for any amount of time. And so you just have to push it away because, in a race, it starts to get painful depending on how hard you're pushing yourself. I always say that every runner goes through pain, but it's, the ones in the back, the ones in the middle, but the ones in front have learned how to suffer better. You just have to go to a place and suffer and come out the other side and want to do it again.
Absolutely. And it's a great lesson for life as well, because the beauty of what you've shared there is whatever people pursue, whether it's education, whether it's business, obviously whether it's running or another sport, some of those things are more universal, like the pain barriers and some of the mindset topics. Visualization comes up over and over again when I do these interviews as a very important topic. So they're really good lessons for life. Another thing with that, Sandy, when you're doing a 100-mile race to that level, do you look at the whole thing, or do you sort of break it down mile by mile, or possibly into smaller quadrants like that, if that makes sense?
Oh, it does. That's a really good question, because this 100-mile race, I've already broken it down into my head into a gazillion pieces, like a puzzle. It's 100 miles, 16 loops of 6 miles. So that's like mind numbing boring to me, because I'm usually a person that's like point to point or one big circle, so 16 loops is going to be rough. And so then you break the 100 down into quarters or halves, and then the 6-mile loops. I've broken it down into 10-minute segments and hourly segments. Every hour you take your salts to make up for, when you don't want to dehydrate. So you want to keep your body level with the right hydration and the right salts. So the race is even 10 minutes. Every 10 minutes, I have to be sipping water. Every hour, I have to be taking 200 calories in and electrolytes, depending on the heat, how many I'm going to take, salt tablets. And then, getting the first loop done, getting the first quarter done, which is 25. And there's always a saying with 100-milers, it doesn't matter how the first 25 goes, it's how the last 25 go. And so you just have to stay focused. And that, and then when it gets tough, you just go over your mantras. So I count to 12 usually. And when I just want to zone out sometimes, and I've thought of everything I can think of, I just count to 12 a gazillion times. So that's probably 12 seconds of counting to 12 for 2 hours. I don't know.
Wow. I love that, Sandy, because it's the side of things that people don't see, isn't it, from the outside looking in. Other runners will know, other people who are doing any form of endurance will know. But for a lot of people from the outside looking in, seeing you win the races and having these great successes and everything like that, that's the side of things that's hidden, is actually what's going through your mind and through the process. So it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful insight. Now, as we move sort of forwards with this, there is the time in your life with the whole burnout thing, with sort of hitting a low point for a while. I don't really want to dwell on certain negativity with that, but we'll need to sort of set the stage, as they say, for what happened. But I'm more interested to find out how you came back from it. But let's start with just giving people a little bit of context for what did happen. Was it sort of an overnight thing, or was it something that came over you over a period of time? Let's start there, please.
I just think it just came to a head. There were a few disappointments in the running, and I found it stressful because it turned into, for me, it was just, okay, who's racing and who do I have to beat and what does my time have to be? And I'm like, I'm not the best runner out there and I'm not the worst, and I would put a lot of pressure on myself that I wanted to do as well as I could. And that started not to be fun anymore. And so when I was training one night in Miami, I had to be up. You can either in Miami run in the heat of the day where it's less humid, or you can run at night where it's not as hot, but more humid. And Miami's flat as a pancake. And I was trying to train on some hills. And the only hill in Miami is Key Biscayne Bridge, which is just a long bridge. A lot of triathletes would go there and train because they could get their running in, their biking on the bridge and swimming. The ocean was right beside us. And I set my car up, and it was a mile over the bridge or a mile back or 2 miles. I can't remember. And I was at the top of the bridge and sweat was just dripping off me. I was just soaked, and you'd shake your arms and sweat would fly all over. And that night I just thought, you know what, I'm done. This is stupid. It's the middle of the night on a bridge, sweating, and I'm not having any fun. And I remember that moment clearly as just going, you know what, time to take a break.
Yeah, absolutely. And I read on your website that at this point you'd been running over 20 years, and you were training 6 days a week. Am I correct in sort of that timeline? Yeah, it's a long time to be pushing your body and mind and spirit sort of beyond the limits. So you were out of running for a number of years. Can you share with us a little bit about what that time was like? Again, not to sort of dwell here, but just to give people the context of what was happening. Because again, burnout is a very real thing, a very serious thing. It's not understood as much as it could be. I've been there myself, not for as long, but I have actually done that. So I know just how real and just how unpleasant it can be. But during that time, you'd presumably gone from doing the athletics and everything full time to stopping. So can you share with us just a little bit about what that time of your life was like in any way that you'd like to describe it, really, to be honest?
Yeah, I just look back on it briefly in regards to wanting to get into the difficulty. Because there was a lot that was going on that was negative, and it was tough because I didn't have the running as an outlet anymore, and so the stress builds up because your body doesn't know what to do, your mind doesn't know what to do. You have my coping mechanism before was running, and all of a sudden you stop, and it was hard, because the stress built up. You're not as happy, and I don't know that I ever thought running would come back to me again. I never thought about it really. And so yeah, it was tough. And again, it's sort of hard to talk about because I'm just so much about a forward looking, trying to be positive, right? And I just know that I just had to hold on every day. I had to just hold on, find things to distract me, try and find new interests, that nothing really popped up. And, and then I had the move from Miami here to Colorado. And so, there were different things like that came up just to be distractions until, one day I just sort of thought, wow, I think I feel like going for a run. And it just was out of nowhere. It's like, I think I'm going to go outside and go for a run. And I did an 8-mile run, and it was like, okay, I'm enjoying this. I'm having fun again. Let's just see where this goes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I always have a lot of respect for people sharing quite personal things that have happened. It's often relevant to these kind of interviews, but I respect you sharing that a lot. The fact that you bounced back from it as well and you're coming back now, absolutely wonderful. And it shows people what's possible, that we all get into these slumps and into these low points for different reasons at different times, but you can come back from it. And even though it does sound a little bit cliche, the fact that you've come back from this shows other people that they can as well. And that's my main reason for mentioning it. So you went for this 8 mile run. Obviously, the fire was burning inside you again. From there, was it sort of a gradual return to training, or did you come back into training as you did previously, if that makes sense?
Yeah, one more thing I'd like to say about that, it's like grief, if I could say with burnout just quickly, is, when you lose somebody, they say some people can grieve for 6 months or 6 years. There's no right or wrong, and so, some people can burn out and they can come back, within a year and be right back on track. There's no set time that you go through something. And I think I would like to say that you can come out on the other side, whatever the amount of time. But in terms of getting back into the running again, it was immediate. I mean, it snowballed. Within 2 weeks, I already had picked a race, had decided I was going to set up a website, was training, got a training plan, had booked my hotels to the race. It all happened in a month. It was just, I'm all in.
Wow. Absolutely incredible. And as you said, it does show people that you can bounce back from these things. I mean, personally, again, not to dwell on this, but when I have experienced burnout as well, mine was like a depression, basically, except it wasn't really a depression as such. It's sort of a mimicking effect of that. It had a lot of the similar symptoms. But with everything being an effort and the physical aches and pains and all the things, it's a very, very strange place to be. So I'm very grateful that you shared that, because especially because as well, I personally feel like in the world today, there's a lot of emphasis on always pushing. There's a lot of emphasis on always hustling and grinding, these types of phrases, a lot of effort of always being in there. And there's not enough emphasis on rest, pacing yourself. The fact that life is a marathon, not a sprint, is a phrase I've always liked. So it shows people that you can come back from that. It's a very powerful message. So, okay, so let's walk further in time, your comeback into racing. You have a race coming up, and we've touched on that at several points during this talk, and I've been excited to ask you about it. Can you share with us your thoughts of how you're looking forward to it, how your preparation's going? With this one, I don't have a really specific question about it, but just to talk about the future in your own words would be wonderful.
I looked for a race that I knew I would have fun at, which sounds funny because everyone has a different version of fun, but I'm at high altitude, 8,000 feet. So I knew I wanted a low altitude race. I started running in April, and I figured that I could train in 4 months, which is aggressive, to do a 100-miler. I gave myself 4 months, which means I had to have something in August. So it had to be in August. It had to be hot. It had to be low elevation, and it had to be in the States. And I found I had never heard of this race before. It's called the Habanero 100. It's in Texas, and it's 100 miles in loops, 105-degree temperatures. They're having record-breaking heat right now, high humidity, which I've endured in Miami. And it's a very sandy course. It's out on a ranch, and there's a lot of sand. And I read a lot of different blogs and saw videos where people were just complaining about the heat and the sand. And I was like, I'm in. This is my race. So so it's coming up in I leave Tuesday. So yeah, it's coming up in mid-August. And I'm just I don't know what to expect. I know I'm going to finish. I have no doubt. I know I can do this race. But in the low points, it's just a matter of hanging on, when your body's aching and it's hot. It's just a matter of you just got to keep plugging away. And this one here, it'll be different for me because I'm not worried about my time. I'm not worried about winning. I'm not worried about anything except crossing the finish line, which I know I can do. So.
Well, that's wonderful that the love is back there for you in terms of running for the love of it, which is what comes over from what you're saying there. I know that you'll be focused on that race entirely at the moment, and it's not always good to look past anything because we need to focus on what's in front of us. But if you wouldn't mind sharing it, do you have plans, specific plans or goals for other races beyond that at the moment, or are you just focusing on that one totally? And
Oh, I've got it planned for like the next couple of years. I've already started. I've got a race. The a race director has reached out to me and asked me if I'm interested in a 500K race in Namibia. So I'm hoping to do that next year, which would be my longest race. I've been to Namibia before and I loved it there. So I'm thinking that would be fun because that would be long and hot and sandy. And then I want to go back to Marathon des Sables in 2025 to do my 10th one. And there's probably only, I can't remember, I wrote it down, but there's maybe only 3 or 4 women in the world that have done that race, 10 times or more. Because it's expensive, not many people can afford to do it that many times, or, it's a one-time only thing for people. But I mean, 10 times doing one of the toughest races in the world is, I can't leave it at 9. I've done it 9 times. I can't just leave it at 9. It has to be 10. So that'll be in 2025. And then there'll be all kinds of races in between that. But yeah, I plan to keep on going.
well, that is wonderful to hear, because as well as what you're doing in terms of your own enjoyment, your own purpose in your life with this, I really do feel that you represent to people this quality of inspiration, as I've already said, in terms of first of all, in terms of what's possible if you put your mind to it. Short and sweet and simple as that. If you put your mind to it, anything's possible. You show that. The fact that you can bounce back from these rough patches, there's a lot of things that you demonstrate for people in all walks of life that are possible. And I'm really glad to hear that you'll continue and keep doing that. One or two other things to touch on as we move into the latter sort of phase of this, pretty much, and we'll wrap this up shortly. But I also wanted to ask you about your public speaking as well. And I know we touched on that briefly. I meant to ask, it slipped my mind when I was listening to these incredible stories of the desert and everything else. Well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about what you were doing with that. Were you speaking at sort of corporate events, or can you share with us a little bit about that part of your life as well, please?
Well, I got into the speaking uh, as a way to help supplement my income because I was no longer a television reporter. I was running and getting sponsorships. I needed to find a way to get some extra income. And when I talked to people about what I was doing, they were just always interested. And then one thing led to another where I was speaking to kids at a school. Then, like hockey's big in Canada. They wanted me to speak at a hockey banquet. And then I got in with a speaking agency and was speaking to companies. And I always broke it down into, anyone can do whatever they put their mind to. And what's something that's really important, though, is that you have to love it. And you have to be willing to devote 110% to it. And for myself, with those 20 years of running, there's a lot of sacrifice in people that chase what they want, whether it's musicians or writers or runners or athletes. You don't get handed things, right? You have to work and work and work and train. I couldn't do Christmas or Thanksgiving or birthdays because, people are going out on a Saturday night to celebrate. And I've got, a 20-mile run on Sunday. You have to skip these things, right? And but the thing is you don't see it as a sacrifice. Other people will see it as a sacrifice, but you see it as this is just what has to be done in order to get what I want and to accomplish what I want. And some people may think, okay, I'm going to put all this work in. I didn't finish my first Marathon des Sables. I had dysentery. That was my first ultra, and I didn't finish. And I was lying in a medical tent, throwing up, had an IV in me. And, I could have easily just said, well, this isn't for me. And it was like, no, I'm going to come back and I'm going to do this. I'm going to work harder. I didn't sit there and think, wow, I gave up a whole year of my life and I didn't finish and I'm a loser. It was like, all right, I'm going to come back next year. And that was that. So, you just, you have to plug away.
Absolutely. Well, powerful life advice there, and on a number of counts, enjoying the process and quite a few things you said. But as I said earlier, to be honest, those low moments from a certain point of view really show people what it's all about, because by contrast, then, coming back, finishing the race multiple times, and everything you've done since then, it really shows the process. It really shows the whole journey. It doesn't just show the pieces that people see. So do you think that you'll go back to doing that type of speaking in the future, or is that something that, because I know you're sort of blogging and doing a bit of that side of things at the moment, so you're putting the story out there in a different way, which is very cool. Do you think public speaking will draw you back in, or have you finished with that for now?
I would like to, actually, because I feel like I'm a mature, experienced runner now. I think that I have a lot more insight, a lot more maturity, a lot more gratitude for everything I've gone through, the highs and the lows, and how to persevere. And it's fun sharing that with people. It's really nice to engage people and see, be in their world and have them be in mine, and find, you know, things that we have in common in terms of persevering. And there's times where someone in another profession will tell me something that I can use in my running, and vice versa. And I think that's really rewarding.
Absolutely. The people that we meet along the way, what we share, that's a very, very special part of life in general. Um, well, Sandy, we've talked about it a lot. I think we're coming up on about the hour mark that I said, so we'll wrap this up. Pretty much the last question that I do have for you, I usually close out my interviews with this topic. Obviously, the future is very bright for you. There's some great things coming up, and I'm really happy that you're back in the swing of things. The last question is sort of out of time. It could be looking back, it can be present, but it's just people that you'd like to thank who've helped you. Now, obviously, with this, we've spent a lot of time focused very much on your achievements and how you've accomplished everything you have. Are there certain people who have contributed to your journey? And it's funny you were just saying about the people you meet along the way, because I like to close out with this, because a lot of times people who've helped people who've achieved a lot like you have, they're sort of behind the scenes, if you like, from the outside world, and people don't always see their contribution. And that contribution can come in any form. I mean, this can be family members, this can be sponsors, this can be even somebody who just sends you a message on social media saying, wow, you go for it, you do a good job, whatever it is. The support comes in many forms. I don't mind which form we talk about, but I would just like to see if there's anyone that you'd like to mention in that regard, please.
It's absolutely all of the above that you just mentioned. It all comes together as a unit. And some people think, it's so cliche, but I mean, it's so necessary and important, because you don't get there by yourself. Even though it's an individual sport that I'm in, there's just so many people along the way and through the years that do support you. The family that has to recognize that you can't make it to an occasion because you have to go to a race. I've had one coach that's been with me off and on through all the years, Cal Zariski with Critical Speed. He's just taught me so much about, as an athlete, about training and eating and visualization. I've worked with sports psychologists, on the power of positive thinking. And like you said, even just people that pat you on the back on Facebook and say, you got this. I'm getting a lot of that right now as I head to this race. And it really means a lot. It does. Like, I was down and out for 8 years, and I'm part of this running group of runners over 50, even though I'm in my 60s. And they're like I'm kind of teary right now, because I don't even know a lot of these people. I'm just part of this group, and they're supporting me. And it really means a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just had that feeling because, as you say, individual sport, yes, but people's contribution makes a big difference in one way or another. And yeah, with the age thing, I'm sort of glad you mentioned that as well because I wasn't going to ask because it's not polite. But the thing is, you do show that age is just a number as well. I mean, it's one of those things where a lot of people think that they have the mindset of being over the hill or being finished at a certain point and this type of thing. And it's all up here. It's all a psychological. It's not a real thing at all. So I actually think that side of your story is really cool as well. But Sandy, we've talked about a lot of things. I don't want to take up much more of your afternoon. It's been a wonderful talk. I'm really grateful for you sharing everything you've shared, and I'm really grateful for you being an open book is basically the way I'll put it across, being um, open, speaking from the heart, sharing how you felt about some of these things, the highs and the lows. I know with this, we've got the inspiration, we've got the fun stuff, we've got a nice mix of topics. And with your life, I'm sure we've just scratched the surface even in an hour, but it's a lot. So just thank you very much for your time and thank you very much for being that open book, really.
Well, I thank you for an excellent interview. It's the interviewer that brings out the stories and the emotion. I'm like kind of teary right now, but I've really enjoyed our talk.
Oh, well, so have I. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.